When I saw the photo, I couldn't breathe. It was tucked inside an old shoebox, one I hadn't opened in years, buried beneath cards, ribbons, and yellowing letters. In that photograph, my best friend Clara was standing far too close to my husband, Daniel. Her hand was on his chest. His smile wasn't the kind you give to a friend. I stared at it until the room went blurry, until my heart started pounding so loud that I could hear nothing else. That picture wasn't just a photo. It was a doorway, one that led straight into the ruin of everything I thought I knew. Clara and I had been friends for 20 years. We met in college, two broke girls sharing instant noodles and heartbreak stories in a tiny apartment with leaky faucets and peeling paint. She was the kind of person who filled a room without trying, loud, funny, effortlessly charming. I was quieter, more cautious, the kind who always double-checked if the stove was off before leaving home. When I met Daniel, she was the first person I told. She helped me pick my dress for our first date, teased me about how nervous I was, and when we got married, she stood beside me as my maid of honor. That's the part that still burns. She was right there, close enough to hear me promise to love him for better or worse, close enough to see the way he looked at me. Our lives became intertwined. Sunday dinners at our place always included her. She'd bring wine, sometimes dessert, always laughter. She called Daniel her brother-in-law by heart. I never questioned it. Why would I? We built something that felt solid, ordinary, safe. I worked as a school counselor. Daniel ran a small marketing agency. Clara worked in event planning, her life a whirl of color and chaos. We saw each other every week. Sometimes just coffee, sometimes a movie, sometimes long talks that stretched into the night. Looking back, I see things I didn't then. The way she'd reach for his glass before her own when pouring wine. How she'd laugh a little too long at his jokes. How sometimes, when I'd step into the room, they'd stop mid-conversation, just for a second, then carry on as if nothing had happened. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it. Clara loved me. Daniel loved me. I was just tired, overthinking, being the paranoid wife that movies love to mock. That's what I told myself. The night it all began to shift was our 10th wedding anniversary. Daniel had planned a small dinner at home. Candles, my favorite music, a bottle of red we'd been saving since our honeymoon. It was simple, sweet, and right before I blew out the single candle on the cake, my phone buzzed. It was Clara. She texted, "Hope you two are celebrating big tonight. Save me some cake." "Love you both." I smiled and showed it to Daniel. He laughed, said, "That's Clara. Never misses a chance for cake." But when he said it, he didn't look at me. He looked down. Just for a moment, that moment stayed with me, even as I told myself it meant nothing. After dinner, he went to take a call from a client. I cleared the table and caught myself humming, a small, unconscious tune of contentment. When I passed by the window, I saw him outside, phone to his ear, pacing, his shoulders tense, his mouth moving fast. He never paced during client calls. When he came back in, I asked, "Everything okay?" He smiled too quickly. "Yeah, just some last-minute issue with the campaign." I wanted to believe him. So I did. In the weeks after, little things started to stand out. Things that never used to. Daniel started spending more time at work. Clara, too, seemed busier than usual. They both started canceling plans, sometimes separately, sometimes together. Once I texted Clara to ask if she wanted to grab lunch. She said she was swamped with a client event. Later that day, when I called Daniel, I heard faint laughter in the background. A woman's laugh. I froze. "Who's that?" I asked lightly. "Oh, just someone from the office," he said. "We're doing a quick meeting before the weekend." I said, "Okay," but the sound of that laugh followed me all day. Still, I tried to silence my mind. After all, Clara had been with me through everything, my mother's death, my miscarriage, every moment of joy and pain. She wasn't just a friend. She was family. Family doesn't do that. Then came the photo. It wasn't new. I could tell by the clothes, by my husband's haircut from years ago. But the intimacy in that image, the way Clara's body curved toward him, her hand pressed against his shirt, her smile soft. It told a story that stretched far beyond one frame. My hands shook as I picked it up. The edges bent slightly under my grip. For a moment, I thought I might faint. I sat on the edge of our bed, the same bed Daniel and I shared for over a decade, and felt something inside me begin to break. I thought of every laugh, every shared dinner, every birthday gift Clara had given me. Every time Daniel had said, "You're overthinking it," I wanted to scream. But instead, I just sat there, staring at that picture, in the dim light of our bedroom, the air thick with silence and the faint scent of his cologne. That's when I realized something. Betrayal doesn't hit like thunder. It seeps in like fog, slow, quiet, suffocating. The next morning, I didn't mention it. I couldn't. I wasn't ready for the truth. But from that day on, I started watching, listening, collecting moments like clues I didn't yet know how to arrange. And the more I saw, the less I could unsee. People think betrayal arrives like a storm, loud, messy, impossible to miss. But for me, it came quietly. It began with a perfume. Clara always wore one scent, amber noir, deep, musky, unforgettable. I used to tease her that she left a trail of it everywhere she went, so when I smelled that same perfume on Daniel's jacket one evening, I laughed. "You smell like Clara," I said, half joking. He froze for half a second, just a flicker, then shrugged. "She hugged me goodbye at the cafe today, remember? We ran into each other downtown." "Oh," I said. "You didn't mention you saw her." "Didn't think it was important," he replied, his voice steady, but his eyes flickered toward the floor. That tiny moment, that one breath between words, felt like a fracture. Over the next few weeks, things continued to shift in small, invisible ways. Daniel's phone was suddenly always on silent. When he showered, he took it with him, said he was expecting an important email. Once, late at night, I woke up to the faint glow of his screen. I pretended to stay asleep as I watched the light flicker across his face. He smiled, not the kind of distracted, work-focused smile, but one soft, almost tender. He typed something quickly, paused, then erased it. Typed again. Smiled once more. In the morning, I checked his phone. It was locked. It had never been locked before. That's when the real silence started to settle between us, the kind that fills a house until even breathing feels loud. Clara, too, had changed. She started missing our weekly coffee dates. When we did meet, she seemed distant, distracted. Her phone was always on the table, screen face down. "Are you okay?" I asked one afternoon as we sat by the window of our favorite cafe. The sunlight hit her face just right. She looked beautiful, glowing even, but in a way that felt different. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired. Work's been insane lately," I nodded. "You sure?" She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm fine, I promise. You worry too much." Her hand was warm, but something about her touch felt rehearsed, as if she was trying too hard to seem normal. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way she avoided my eyes when I mentioned Daniel's name. A few days later, I decided to surprise Daniel at his office. I'd baked muffins, blueberry, his favorite, and thought I'd drop by before heading to work. It wasn't something I normally did, but I wanted to feel connected again. When I arrived, his secretary, Lila, smiled awkwardly. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Collins. Daniel just stepped out." "Really?" I asked, checking the time. "Where to?" She hesitated. He said he had a client meeting. Off-site. I forced a smile. "Do you know where?" Lila fidgeted with a pen. "No, sorry. He didn't say." Her eyes darted toward the muffins. He'll be sorry he missed those. Something about her tone made my stomach twist. On the way out, I stopped at the curb to call him. No answer. I texted instead. "Stop by your office to bring muffins. Lila said you're out. Everything okay?" No reply. 2 hours later, I got a message. "Sorry, meeting ran long. Just heading back now. Thanks for thinking of me." I should have felt reassured, but I didn't. Because at that same moment, Clara posted an Instagram story. It was a simple photo. 2 coffee cups on a cafe table. The corner of a man's sleeve visible. The caption read, Midday recharge. The sleeve, navy blue with a faint white stripe, looked just like Daniel's jacket. I told myself it was coincidence. I had to. Otherwise, the truth would crush me before I was ready to face it. I started writing things down after that. Small details. Places, times, words. A private log that I hid inside a notebook labeled work notes. Tuesday, 5:45 p.m. Daniel said meeting. Clara canceled dinner. Both phones off. Saturday, Daniel golfing. Clara posted a sunset photo. Same field. Same fence. It was as if my entire life had become a puzzle. One I never wanted to solve. But the pieces kept falling into place, no matter how hard I tried to stop them. The breaking point came one afternoon when I stopped by Clara's apartment. She told me she was running errands, but I was nearby and thought I'd leave a book I'd borrowed. When I got there, her car was in the driveway. I knocked once, twice, no answer. I tried calling. Went straight to voicemail. I turned to leave, but something made me glance through the side window. The curtains were half drawn, and there it was. Daniel's briefcase on the floor. The same black leather one with his initials embossed in silver. My hands went cold. My first instinct was denial. Maybe he'd dropped it off for her. Maybe she was helping him with an event, maybe. But even as the excuses formed, they felt hollow. That night, I said nothing. He came home late, smelling faintly of Clara's perfume. I pretended to be asleep. When he kissed my forehead, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop from crying. It's strange how love and suspicion can exist in the same space, like fire and air, each feeding the other. I still loved him then, and I still loved her, in a twisted, aching way. I wanted so badly for it not to be true. But deep down, a quiet voice had already whispered the truth. I just wasn't ready to listen, not yet. There's a point in every unraveling where the truth no longer hides. It starts to show itself, piece by piece, daring you to look. For me, that moment came on a Thursday evening. Daniel had told me he'd be working late again. A client deadline, he said. I nodded, pretending not to notice that he didn't look me in the eye when he said it. By then, I'd stopped asking questions, not out of trust, but out of exhaustion. But something about that night felt different. Maybe it was the way he'd dressed, a crisp white shirt I hadn't seen in months, a spritz of that cologne he only wore on special occasions. Maybe it was the way he'd checked his phone twice before leaving, as though confirming a secret message. When the door closed behind him, I just stood there. The silence in the house felt heavy, almost thick. I wasn't planning to follow him, at least not at first. But 10 minutes later, I found myself grabbing my keys, my hands trembling as I whispered to no one. Just to ease my mind, just to see. The city was glowing under the streetlights, the air still warm from the day. I drove slowly, keeping distance, my heart thudding in my chest. Daniel's car turned toward the old part of town, the side streets lined with cafes and little restaurants where people went for quiet dinners and soft music. He parked outside Luna's Bistro, a small place with ivy on the walls and candlelight flickering through the windows. I pulled over a few spaces back. I waited. Watched. Then I saw her, Clara. She stepped out of a cab, her hair falling over her shoulders, that same easy grace I'd always admired. She looked beautiful, effortlessly so, wearing the blue dress I once helped her pick out for her birthday. My breath caught as Daniel walked up to her. He smiled, that same smile I'd seen 100 times across our kitchen table, and she smiled back. Not the friendly, teasing grin I knew, but something softer, intimate, the kind of smile that belonged to a secret. He placed his hand on her back as they walked inside. That one touch, gentle, familiar, broke something in me I didn't know could break. I sat there for what felt like hours, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. Part of me wanted to burst through the restaurant doors and scream. Another part wanted to drive away and never come back. But I didn't move. I just sat there, watching through the glass as they laughed, leaned close, shared bites of dessert. Every gesture was a knife, small, deliberate, cutting through every memory we'd built. When they left, I stayed far enough behind to not be seen. They walked down the street, stopping near the park. It was quiet, just a few street lamps glowing faintly. Then he kissed her, a slow, deliberate kiss, one that carried history, comfort, and guilt all at once. I covered my mouth, afraid that if I breathed too loudly, I'd shatter. That was the moment I knew there was no mistake. No misunderstanding, no innocent explanation. My husband, my partner, my supposed forever, was in love with my best friend. When I got home, I didn't cry. Not yet. I sat on the floor, staring at the wall, my body numb. The clock ticked louder than usual, each second a reminder of how long I'd been living in a lie. Around midnight, Daniel came home. His hair was slightly tousled, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He smelled faintly of wine and Clara's perfume. He smiled softly. "You're still up?" "I couldn't sleep," I said quietly. He walked over, kissed my forehead, the same spot he always did, and said, "You worry too much, you know that?" I forced a nod, my throat tight. "I'm going to shower," he said. "Okay." When he left the room, I finally let my tears fall, slow, silent, relentless. The next morning, I couldn't look at him without seeing her. Every sound, every gesture, every silence between us felt like a confession. That afternoon, I met Clara. I texted her. "Coffee?" "Need to talk," she replied right away. "Of course. Same cafe?" When she arrived, she hugged me. Her arms wrapped around me like always, but I couldn't return it. I felt like I was hugging a stranger wearing my best friend's skin. We ordered, sat by the window. She was glowing again. That same lightness, that same energy. I watched her carefully, my mind rehearsing the words I didn't yet know how to say. "Clara," I began softly. "Can I ask you something?" She smiled. "Of course. Have you seen Daniel lately? Outside of, group things?" Her hand froze around her cup. Just for a second. Then she laughed, too loudly. "What? No." "Why would you ask that?" Her voice was a little too high, her smile a little too tight. "I don't know," I said, my tone steady. "You two used to be close. I just wondered." She waved her hand. "Oh, please don't be silly. Daniel's like a brother to me." The word brother hit me like a slap. I nodded slowly, watching as she picked up her cup with trembling fingers. She looked down, not at me, not at anything. Just down, as if hiding from the truth her mouth couldn't speak. When I left the cafe, I knew I'd never see her the same way again. That night, I made a decision. I wanted proof. I needed it, something undeniable. Something that would silence the part of me still desperate to believe this wasn't real. So I installed a small tracking app on Daniel's phone, one that mirrored his messages and location. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't keep drowning in doubt. 2 nights later, it happened. He told me he was going to a late meeting. I checked the app. His location pinged not at the office, but at the Lakeview Inn, a quiet hotel on the edge of town. I followed. My heart beat so hard I could hear it in my ears as I parked near the back entrance. His car was there, and so was hers. I walked toward the lobby, my legs shaking. The receptionist looked up, startled, as I stepped to the counter. "I'm looking for Daniel Collins," I said, forcing calm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't give out guest information." I nodded. "That's fine. I just need to know what room he's in. It's urgent, family emergency," the woman hesitated. Then she sighed. "Room 214, I thanked her. My feet felt like lead as I climbed the stairs, each step echoing louder than the last. When I reached the door, I heard laughter. Hers. And then his voice. I didn't think. I just opened the door. They froze. Daniel was half-dressed. Clara was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face draining of color. The air was thick with shock, perfume, and guilt. I looked at them both, my voice barely a whisper. "How long?" Neither answered. "How long?" Clara began to cry. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, unable to meet my eyes. I turned toward the door. "Don't bother lying," I said quietly. "You already did that enough." Then I left, leaving behind the two people who had once been my whole world. I don't remember driving home that night. I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car outside the house, the headlights still on, my hands locked around the steering wheel. My reflection in the rearview mirror didn't look like me anymore. My face was pale, eyes wide, a stranger's emptiness staring back. When I finally stepped inside, the house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the weight of what I'd seen. Every photo on the wall, every shared memory, suddenly looked like a lie framed in glass. I sat on the living room couch until sunrise, waiting for Daniel to come home. He didn't. Around 8, I heard the front door open. He walked in, hair disheveled, shirt half-buttoned, the smell of guilt trailing behind him. He froze when he saw me sitting there. "Emily," he started, voice soft, hesitant. "Don't," I said, my tone sharp enough to slice through the silence. "Don't say my name like you still have the right to." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I can explain," I laughed, the sound dry, bitter, foreign. "Explain? You were in a hotel room with my best friend. What explanation could possibly make sense of that?" He looked down. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." "This way?" I repeated, standing up. "So it was supposed to happen, just not how I found out." His silence was answer enough. I felt my chest tighten, my breath coming in short bursts. "How long, Daniel?" He hesitated. "How long?" "6 months, he whispered. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of dinners, smiles, and nights spent beside me while his heart was somewhere else, with her. I felt dizzy. "You've been sleeping with my best friend for 6 months?" "It wasn't just that," he said quickly. "It's more complicated." "Complicated?" I snapped. "You betrayed me with someone I trusted with my life." "There's nothing complicated about that." He stepped closer. "Emily, please. I didn't plan for any of this. I was lost, we were distant, and Clara..." I raised my hand. "Don't you dare say her name." He stopped, guilt flashing across his face. I looked him dead in the eye. "You know what the worst part is? You didn't even have the courage to end it before you destroyed everything. You just wanted to have both, a wife for your reputation and a lover for your excitement." He didn't deny it. That silence said more than words ever could. When he left the room, I finally broke. My knees gave out, and I collapsed to the floor, the sobs tearing through me like shards of glass. Every part of me hurt, not just from the betrayal, but from the humiliation. Clara had been my sister in everything but blood. I'd held her hand through heartbreaks, celebrated her birthdays, shared secrets we'd promised to guard forever. And she'd used that closeness to slip into the one place I thought was safe. My marriage. By noon, my sadness had started to change shape. It hardened. Grief began to turn into something else, something colder, sharper. That evening, Clara called. I didn't answer at first. But when she called again, I picked up, not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I needed to. "Emily," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, can we talk?" "There's nothing left to say," I replied flatly. "I never meant to hurt you." "I swear I didn't," I laughed bitterly. "Then what did you mean to do, Clara? Accidentally fall into my husband's bed? Accidentally tell him you loved him?" She began to cry. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. It just happened." I closed my eyes. "You keep saying that. Like betrayal is something that just happens. Like you tripped and fell into an affair." There was silence on the other end. Then quietly she said, "I think I love him." Those words hit harder than anything Daniel had said. For a long moment I couldn't speak. Then I whispered, "Then you can have him, Emily." "No," I said sharply. "You can have the man who cheats, lies, and destroys the woman he vowed to protect. You can have the guilt, the mess, the broken promises. You deserve each other." And then I hung up. For the next few days, the house was eerily quiet. Daniel tried to talk to me twice, but I refused. Instead, I began to plan, not out of rage, but out of clarity. I didn't want revenge in the way people imagine it, shouting matches, broken plates, or public scenes. I wanted something far more powerful, the peace that comes from letting them both watch me rise without them. So I gathered the financial documents, the joint accounts, the house deeds, everything that tethered me to him. I called a lawyer. When Daniel came home one evening, I handed him the papers. "What's this?" he asked. "Freedom," I said. "For both of us." He looked down, his hands shaking. "You're divorcing me?" "Yes." He sank into the chair, covering his face. "Emily, please. Don't do this. We can fix it. I made a mistake." I stood tall, steady. "You didn't make a mistake, Daniel. You made a choice. And now I'm making mine." The night before he moved out, he came into the living room where I was sitting. He looked exhausted, older somehow. "You really hate me, don't you?" he said quietly. I met his gaze. "No," I said after a pause. "I don't hate you. I pity you. Because someday when she betrays you the way you betrayed me, you'll finally understand what you threw away." He didn't respond. He just walked out. And for the first time in years, the house felt still. Empty, yes, but peaceful. Days turned into weeks. Clara disappeared from my life completely. I heard whispers through mutual friends that she and Daniel had tried to make it work, but it fell apart within months. Apparently, guilt doesn't build a lasting home. And me? I learned how to breathe again. How to laugh again. I started painting, something I hadn't done since college. I traveled. I began to rediscover the woman I'd buried under years of compromise. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in ages. And for once, I didn't see a broken wife or a betrayed friend. I saw a survivor, someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger, quieter, yes, but unbreakable. But the story didn't end there, because one day, months later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It was of Clara, and in the corner of the picture, barely visible, was a hospital wristband. My heart stopped when I saw the name printed on it, Daniel Collins. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The photo trembled in my hands, the faint scent of old paper mixing with the lavender candle burning on the table. The wristband was unmistakable. Daniel's name, printed in that sterile hospital font. My mind spun with questions. Why was Clara at a hospital? Why send me this photo? And what did it mean that Daniel's name was on her wristband? I stared at it for what felt like hours, my thoughts looping between anger, fear, and something that almost felt like pity. After everything, I didn't think they could shock me anymore. But they had. That night I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the image. Her pale face, the corner of a hospital bed behind her, and that wristband. By morning, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth. Not because I still cared about either of them, but because I needed to close the last open door in my heart. I drove to the hospital listed on the wristband. My hands were shaking when I reached the reception desk. "Hi," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I'm looking for a patient." "Clara Hayes." The nurse glanced at her screen, then at me. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "She's not a patient here anymore." "Was she okay?" I asked, unsure why I even cared. The nurse hesitated. "She was discharged 3 weeks ago. It was a difficult pregnancy." I froze. "Pregnancy?" The nurse looked away. "I'm sorry, I can't give more details." I didn't need her to. The air around me seemed to disappear. A pregnancy. Daniel's wristband. A photo sent anonymously. The truth fell into place. Cruel, heavy, undeniable. Clara had been pregnant. And Daniel was the father. For a long moment, I just stood there, gripping the edge of the counter as the world tilted around me. I thought I had cried all the tears I had to give, but a new wave came. Silent, burning, relentless. I stumbled out of the hospital, sat in my car, and screamed. It wasn't rage anymore, it was exhaustion. It was grief for a future that had died twice, once with the affair, and now with this. By the time I drove home, I was done running from it. I was ready to face it all, publicly if I had to. A few days later, I ran into an old friend, Jessica, at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me, and I could tell by her expression that she'd already heard whispers. "Emily," she said carefully. "How are you?" I smiled faintly. "I've been better," she bit her lip. I didn't want to say anything, but I saw Clara last week. My heart skipped. "Where?" She was at her mother's house. She looked thin, tired. She had a baby with her, maybe a month old. I felt a strange calm settle over me. "And Daniel?" Jessica hesitated. "He was there too." They didn't look happy. Something inside me, the last fragile piece that still carried anger, finally cracked. I realized I didn't need revenge. They were already living it. A week later, fate handed me a kind of closure I hadn't expected. I was at a cafe downtown, sketching quietly, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Emily?" I turned. Daniel. He looked older, his shoulders hunched, his face tired. A shadow of the man I once knew. "Hi," I said, my tone even. He gave a small, broken smile. "You look good." "Thanks." He sat down across from me uninvited, his hands trembling slightly. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "I didn't think I'd want to," I said honestly. He nodded slowly. "I deserve that." We sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with things unsaid. Then he said quietly, "Clara had a baby." "I know." He looked down. "It was mine, or it was supposed to be." My chest tightened. "Supposed to be?" He swallowed. "The baby didn't make it. For a long time, neither of us spoke." "I'm sorry," I finally said. "Not for him, not for Clara, but for the innocent life caught in the wreckage of our choices." He wiped at his eyes. "She left, moved to another city, said she couldn't stay where people knew what she'd done." "And you?" I asked. He gave a hollow laugh. "Trying to live with myself." There was a strange honesty in his voice, the kind that comes when someone's already been punished by life. "I hope you find peace," I said softly. He nodded. "You already did, didn't you?" I smiled. Small, genuine. "I'm learning how." After he left, I sat there for a long time, the sound of clinking cups and low chatter filling the cafe. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim. The truth had burned through me, yes, but it had also cleared space for something new. People in town eventually learned what had happened. I never spoke ill of either of them. I didn't need to. Their own actions had already written the story for everyone to see. What people whispered about in private became public knowledge. The affair, the baby, the heartbreak. But I kept my dignity, and that made all the difference. When my divorce finalized, I didn't celebrate. I simply lit a candle in my living room, the same one that had once smelled like betrayal, and I whispered to myself, "You made it. In time." Life moved on. I started hosting art workshops at the local community center. I met people who didn't know my past. People who saw me not as the woman who was betrayed, but as someone kind, resilient, quietly strong, and sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, I'd think about Clara and Daniel. Not with anger anymore, but with a strange sense of peace. Because the truth is, some betrayals are gifts wrapped in pain. They tear your world apart so you can finally rebuild it on your own terms. And that's exactly what I did. But one night, while cleaning out an old drawer, I found something unexpected. An unopened envelope, tucked inside one of my art journals. It was from Clara. The postmark was from months earlier. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside, in her familiar handwriting, was just one line. "You were right. He did to me what he did to you." I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the drawer, and smiled, not out of satisfaction, but out of closure. After reading Clara's letter, something inside me shifted, not sharply, but softly, like a door closing with finality. For months, I had carried this quiet ache in my chest, wondering if she ever felt remorse, if Daniel ever understood the gravity of what they'd done. Her words didn't excuse anything, but they told me what I needed to know. Life had already taught them the lesson I once wanted to deliver myself. It's strange, the way pain changes shape over time. At first it's fire, all-consuming, wild, impossible to control. Then slowly it becomes something else. It cools into embers, then dust, until one day you realize you're breathing normally again. That realization came to me one morning as I was painting. The sun streamed through the window, painting the walls in gold. My hands were speckled with color, the faint scent of turpentine lingering in the air. On the canvas before me was a landscape, open fields, warm light, a single tree standing strong against the horizon. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt the same way. When people came to my art workshops, they often assumed I had always been this calm, this centered. I never told them about the nights I cried until I couldn't breathe, or the mornings I woke up wishing I could stay asleep. I didn't need to. My peace didn't come from pretending the pain never happened. It came from surviving it. There's a quiet strength in rebuilding. It's not dramatic or loud. It's steady, like learning how to live again, one heartbeat at a time. One afternoon during a workshop, a woman named Layla stayed behind after everyone had left. She was in her early 30s, soft-spoken, eyes heavy with something I recognized instantly. Heartbreak. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, watching me wash my brushes. "For what?" "For today's class. For saying that art doesn't have to be beautiful to be meaningful." I smiled. Most things in life aren't beautiful when they're being created. But that doesn't mean they're not becoming something. She hesitated, then whispered, "My husband left me. For someone I trusted." The words hit me like a gentle echo of my own past. I looked at her, truly looked, and saw the version of myself I once was. "I'm sorry," I said softly. She nodded. I don't know how to start over." I placed my hand over hers. "You already have. You showed up today. That's the first step." Her eyes welled with tears. "Does it ever stop hurting?" I smiled faintly. "No, but it changes. It becomes something that doesn't control you anymore. You learn to live with it. And one day, it just becomes part of your story." That was the truth no one told me when I was broken. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering differently. A year passed. Life had taken on a gentle rhythm. Mornings with coffee and soft jazz, afternoons filled with students' laughter, evenings spent reading by the window. My world had grown smaller, but also deeper. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about Daniel. Not as the man who betrayed me, but as someone who once walked beside me during a different season of life. We both had our flaws. We both made choices. But in the end, I had learned to forgive. Not for him, but for me. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't a gift to the one who hurt you. It's freedom from the weight of carrying their mistakes. Then one spring morning, as I walked through the park near my home, I saw something that made me stop. A little boy, maybe 4 or 5, was running ahead of his mother, laughing, his curls bouncing in the sunlight. His joy was infectious, unguarded. I felt my throat tighten. There was a time I thought I'd never smile at the sight of someone else's happiness again. That I'd always be haunted by what I lost. But as I watched that child laugh, I realized something profound. I wasn't sad anymore. The ache had turned into gratitude. Gratitude that I was no longer trapped in a lie. Gratitude that I had learned what real love, self-love, truly meant. Because sometimes, losing everything you thought you wanted gives you the space to discover who you really are. That night, I opened my journal, the same one I had once filled with questions, tears, and sleepless thoughts, and wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become afterward." It became my mantra. I started sharing small pieces of my story online, not the details of betrayal, but the lessons that came from it. Dignity, resilience, and how to rebuild without bitterness. To my surprise, people connected with it. Women from around the world wrote messages saying my words helped them find strength. 2, it reminded me that pain, when shared with honesty, can become purpose. One evening, as I closed my studio, I found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a handwritten note. Short, simple. Thank you for helping me find light again. Oh, it was from Layla. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. That's when I realized my story had come full circle. What once broke me was now helping others heal. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had turned into the foundation of something meaningful, something honest. Months later, I visited my parents' old house, the one I hadn't been to since before everything fell apart. I stood in the backyard, where Daniel and I once planted a rose bush together. The roses were still there. Overgrown, a little wild but still blooming. I crouched down, brushing my fingers over the petals. They were soft, vibrant. Proof that beauty can still grow in places touched by pain. I whispered quietly, I forgive you both. The wind carried my words away, and I felt lighter than I had in years. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I looked at the sky, streaked in amber and violet, and smiled. This was my life now. Not perfect, not easy, but mine. And I wouldn't trade it for anything, because peace, I had learned, doesn't come when everything is fixed. It comes when you stop trying to fix what was never yours to begin with. When I got home, I poured myself a cup of tea, opened the window, and listened to the evening sounds, the crickets, the distant hum of traffic, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I was finally free. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had turned into the foundation of something meaningful. I looked around my studio, the sunlight spilling across the easels, the scent of oil paint and old wood, the faint hum of life outside. It wasn't the life I once planned, but it was mine. Entirely, unapologetically mine. I no longer measured my worth by the love I lost, but by the peace I found. That weekend, I hung my first solo exhibition in a small local gallery. Each painting told a part of my story, the storm, the silence, the bloom after ruin. I titled the collection, Becoming Whole. When the crowd thinned near the end of the night, I stood quietly in front of the final piece, a woman standing in sunlight, her face half turned toward the horizon. A man beside me said softly, "She looks free." I smiled. She is, because she was me. I walked home under a sky painted in shades of gold and violet, the kind of sunset that makes the world look forgiving. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I was living. And in that quiet moment, I understood something I wish I could tell every woman who's ever been betrayed. Your story doesn't end with their betrayal. It begins with your decision to rise,